Hello friends, my name is the real Emile, and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some hypercars. I'm going to be kicking things off with the first hypercar of today, which is the McLaren P1, 940 horsepower, 663 foot-pound of torque, 3,296 pounds of weight. This is also the first of the hybrid trinity that will go around the track today. In case you didn't know, the McLaren P1, LaFerrari and 918 are the new age of hypercars, or so we're told. Which use electric motors in order to aid them in the ultimate goal of performance. The P1, out of all of the cars engrossed in that, it's probably my favourite of the bunch. I kind of like its design the most, even though it is a little bit weird looking. And yeah, I don't know, something about the McLaren P1, I just kind of like it compared to the others. Anyways, in terms of actual driving, the P1 is pretty darn decent, to be fair. It is a pretty predictable car, which is a good thing. You know, it's still a 903 horsepower rear wheel drive car. You are still going to have issues if you try and full throttle it out of every corner, but if you're a little bit careful, the P1 can be a pretty darn good handling vehicle. It can be, again, it's a predictable car to drive as well. It won't try to play any tricks on you or anything. Yeah, the P1, very, very solid vehicle, I do have to say. Yeah, I kind of like driving the McLaren P1. Next up, we have the LaFerrari, 963 horsepower, 663 foot-pound of torque, 3,031 pounds of weight. Now, comparing this to the McLaren P1, this thing weighs a hell of a lot less, and it has 60 more horsepower. Same amount of torque, though, interestingly enough. Between the McLaren P1 and the LaFerrari, well, ultimately, when it's being good to you, the LaFerrari is a better handling car than the P1. It's just that little bit nicer through the corners, it's that little bit quicker through corners, and that does mean that the LaFerrari on paper is a better car than the P1. However, it isn't as predictable as the P1. This will try to bite you occasionally. It can snap and just go sideways, and it will occasionally try to kill you. Again, it's a 963 horsepower rear wheel drive car. You've got to expect that a little bit. Sort of when it comes to choosing between the P1 and the LaFerrari, ultimately, again, it comes down to trading that little bit of an edge the LaFerrari can have through the corners with the predictability of the McLaren. If you want an easier car to drive, go with the McLaren, but if you want to be ultimately faster around a track, the LaFerrari is the car to go with. It's just quicker in a straight line, it's a little bit quicker through the corners, it is the quicker of the two if driven well. Finally, from the hybrid trinity, we have the Porsche 918 Spyder, 887 horsepower, 829 foot-pound of torque, 3,692 pounds of weight. Statistically then, the 918 is at a disadvantage compared to the P1 and the LaFerrari. It is much heavier than both of those cars, 300 pounds heavier than the P1, 600 pounds heavier than the Ferrari, and it is down on power. However, it does have 200 more torques and all-wheel drive. Now, all-wheel drive on a wet track can make all of the difference, as we have here. As a result, what's the 918 like to drive? It's a solid car. I will say, between driving this in the dry and driving it in the wet, very, very similar car. You know, either way, it can go sideways a bit. It isn't the grippiest of all-wheel drive cars, it has to be said. It's not a bad car by any stretch of the imagination, but there are much better all-wheel drive cars to pick in terms of handling. However, if we're talking straight up acceleration, the 918 is phenomenal. You know, thanks to all-wheel drive launch, it is quicker off the line than the P1 and the LaFerrari. Through the corners, not quite as quick as either of those two cars. Again, the 918, it is the easiest of the three to drive, but probably when it comes down to just overall performance, it doesn't quite have the same sharpness that the P1 and the LaFerrari have. Next up, we move on to proper petrol power. This is the Koenigsegg Agera, 940 horsepower, 811 foot-pound of torque, 3,164 pounds of weight. Out of all the cars, from a personal preference here today, this is my favourite. I adore the Koenigsegg Agera. It's a really, really awesome car. It's honestly in my top 5 cars of all time. I adore the Agera. Part of the reason for that is just how crazy this thing is. 940 horsepower, rear-wheel drive hypercar that can do well over 250 miles per hour. It is pretty darn insane, it has to be said. In fact, this thing can almost get to 270 miles per hour if given a long enough straight. As far as actually driving goes, it's alright. It's quite crazy though. This doesn't have the sharpness of the P1 LaFerrari or the 918. This is not your time attack car for stomping those times. This is a bit of fun, ultimately, and if you want to go crazy fast, have a big smile on your face, and drive something that's a little bit different, the Huayra is the car for you. That's why I love it, personally. Yeah, it is crazy. It isn't quite the time attack car that you would maybe want, but it's still phenomenal fun. Next up, we move to the Pagani Huayra, a car which I don't particularly like. 700 horsepower, 737 foot-pound of torque, 3,153 pounds of weight. This is our least powerful vehicle here today, and when I say 700 horsepower is the least powerful thing here today, yeah, you know you're in for a pretty fast episode. The Huayra then. Ultimately, I don't usually like driving this car on the dry. I find it to be pretty horrible when it comes to sort of hypercar, even supercar levels of handling. It just really is not particularly good. It wants to slide everywhere. It's not particularly fun. In the wet, things are slightly improved. I've got to say, it's actually alright in the wet. It handles like your basic supercar, really. You know, Ferrari 458s, similar to that, it does handle like that. Granted, it has got a little bit of an edge on speed compared to those vehicles, but through the corners, it feels pretty darn similar. And that's really the issue with the Huayra, because even in the wet, where it drives its best, where it's on par with sorts of supercars, there are still plenty of supercars out there which are way cheaper than this thing, better looking, and ultimately they're better buys. You know, the 2017 Ford GT, the Ferrari 488, they're all better cars than the Huayra in my personal opinion. Next up, we have the Bugatti Veyron SuperSport, 1,183 horsepower, 1,105 foot-pound of torque, 4,044 pounds of weight. Ultimately, one of the most divisive cars in the world. Some people love it, some people hate it. Me personally, I respect it from a technological standpoint, but ultimately, it isn't really my cup of tea. That being said, you cannot deny how phenomenal this thing is on paper. It is another all-wheel drive car. And how does it drive? Well, I've got one simple phrase in my notes, and that is holy mother of understeer. My god, this thing understeers badly. Yeah, all-wheel drive, lots of weight and lots of power usually do result in understeer, and the Veyron is possibly the most understeery vehicle you can drive in Forza Motorsport 6 from stock. It's just not a good handling car. You can take barely any speed through the corners. That being said, once the corners end, it's stupidly fast. There is nothing faster than this when it comes to accelerating out of corners. It's just wham, bam, whoosh. It just goes. It's an insane car to drive, admittedly. It's actually quite a bit of fun, but just don't take it to any short tracks, such as Top Gear, because it will not be at its fullest potential. Down a similar route, we have the Hennessey Venom GT, 1,200 horsepower, 1,155 foot-pound of torque, 2,685 pounds of weight. It is the most powerful vehicle here today, the torquiest vehicle, and the lightest vehicle. Now, what this car is more than the Bugatti Veyron in terms of sort of statistics, coupled to a rear-wheel drive chassis. And what does that result in? It's stupid. It is just stupid. I'm going to be perfectly honest, you know, isn't stupid in a Koenigsegg Huayra kind of fun way. This car is almost undrivable. It's not very fun to drive. Whether, you know, in the dry, it's a bit better. It's still not particularly for beginners, shall we say, but in the wet, it is an absolute travesty. Yeah, once you hit a straight and get traction going, it is phenomenally quick, but ultimately, is that really going to save this car around this track? I guess we'll have to see at the end of the episode when it lays down its time, but yeah, the Venom just not very good to drive at all. I didn't have much fun. I'm not a huge fan of the Hennessey Venom to begin with. It's a little bit to me. So yeah, don't drive it in the wet. It's not a fun experience. The final car for today is the Lamborghini Veneno, 740 horsepower, 508 foot-pound of torque, 3,218 pounds of weight. It is the least torquey vehicle here today. However, the Veneno, it is all-wheel drive. It is a Lamborghini, and as we've seen in the past, Lamborghinis are very, very good handling cars around this circuit. So it was interesting to see how the Veneno would get on. Ultimately, it's excellent. It is so very, very excellent. I love driving the Veneno. This might be one of the best handling all-wheel drive cars in Forza. It's a very, very, very capable vehicle. Very good through the corners. Granted, you know, straight line speed, it's good. It's all-wheel drive. It has 740 horsepower. How couldn't it be? But compared to some of the cars here today, it's not on the same level. But what it loses in straight line speed, it more than makes up through the corners with that, because it's just so grippy. It's so nice to drive. Out of all the vehicles here today, if I had to drive one, you know, any of them for the rest of time is the only hypercar I could drive, Veneno would probably be it, because it is just a very, very solid handling vehicle. Really very good car. If you haven't tried it out, I do recommend trying it. Anyways, moving on to the times, and the Veneno is actually the fastest car today, and it goes into first place on our leaderboard with a 1:14.301. On his heels, however, the fastest of the hybrid hypercars was the LaFerrari, going into second place with a 1:14.669. The 918 follows behind in third place, 1:15.254, beats the Atom V8. The P1 just didn't quite have the speed or the handling to cope with the other two cars. I did drive the Ferrari very well. It goes into fifth place with 1:15.792. The Bugatti Veyron, despite the understeer, does go into sixth, beats the Ford GT with 1:16.148. Koenigsegg Huayra 8th, 1:17.471. Wasn't expecting an ultra quick time from that car, but it did beat the Zonda, which is kind of surprising. And the Pagani Huayra goes into 11th place with a 1:17.986. It does get beaten by its sibling, the Zonda. Out of the zoo cars, again, the Zonda is the better to drive of the bunch, but yeah, I'm really shocked by just how quick that Veneno was. Yeah, that's not getting beaten for a very, very long time, I assure you. And moving down to the bottom of the board, there's only one more car to cover for today, and that is the Hennessey Venom, going into 13th, which is kind of apt. A 1:18.331. It does beat the Noble M600 by slightly, but it does get beaten by the 458 Speciale. You just can't get the power down in this wet track, and as a result, the Venom just didn't place quite as well as maybe it should have. Yeah, not a very fun car to drive, that is for certain. Anyways, friends, that is it for this episode of Forza Top Gear's Laps. As always, if you have themes you'd like to suggest for this show, feel free to drop them down below in the comment section, and I will get to them at some point. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very, very much for watching. My name has been the Real Emile, and until next time, a farewell.